Hello, my name is Jimena Perry. I welcome you today for this special event of the Explorers of the International Federation for Public History. I'm very happy to have the steering committee here with me. This is a very special event. For me, there has been a little not change, but let's say miscommunication about the time zones. So our president, Tanya Evans, will be arriving a little late, but she will be here with us and she will be happy to answer any questions or inquiries when we have Q&A. So I'm going to start presenting our guests today, and then we'll go and answer some questions we have talked about. So the president of the Federation is Tanya Evans. She's an associate professor of history at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia, and director of the Centre for Applied History. She was trained as a historian in Britain and moved to Australia in 2008. She has served as a steering committee member of the International Federation for Public History since 2018, and she's also an executive board member of Public History Weekly. Then we have with us David Dean. David is professor of history at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, and co-director of the Carleton Center for Public History. He is also the co-editor of the IFPH journal, International Public History. There's also with us today is Joanna Wachton. I'm hoping I'm saying your last name correctly. She is associate professor and deputy dean at the University of Wrocław in Poland in the Department of Methodology of Teaching History. She was also a Fulbright fellow at Loyola University in Chicago and Kosciuszko Foundation, Immigration History Research Center at Minneapolis, and Hoover Institution at Stanford University alumna, and she was also a visiting professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem between 2010 and 2011. There's also today with us Irmgard Sundorf. She's a research associate for University Cooperation and Knowledge Transfer at the Center for Contemporary History Potsdam, and one of the leaders of the Master Program in Public History at the Freie Universität in Berlin. There's also with us today Sri Jan Sandeep Mandal. He is part of the faculty of the Center for Public History at the Srishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design and Technology in Bengaluru, where he heads the MA program in Public History, the first and only graduate program dedicated to public history in India. And finally, me, perhaps some of you already know me. My name is Jimena Perry. I am a Latin American scholar, originally from Colombia. I was trained as an anthropologist at Cambridge University, and I got my PhD at the University of Texas at Austin. Currently, I am part of Iona College, and I'm a professor of the history department, and I have been the project manager of the Explorers since 2018. So welcome, everybody. We are very glad that you are here. And since this session is just for the audience to get to know us better and to learn about the activities of the IFPH, we will start with a question that each one of the members of the steering committee will answer. The first one is, why are we committed to the project of international public history? If you agree, we will start with the order I can see in my screen, and I will tell you which one goes first. So the first person of the steering committee I see in my screen is David. David, why are you committed to the project of international public history? You're on mute.
That's the refrain for our generation, isn't it? The Zoom refrain, you're on mute, unmute yourself. So when I was thinking about this question, I guess I'd start off with three answers, really. The first is that since public history is very much a field that looks at history and the role of the past in our everyday lives, and since so much of our everyday lives these days is fluid and it's mobile, that so much of what we experience is transnational and global, I think it's really important that we as public historians get out of our national straitjackets and to start thinking globally and start thinking internationally and transnationally. That is partly because I think working internationally, you end up finding common ground with individuals and with communities across the globe. And that helps us act against narrow-mindedness, against xenophobia, against exclusionary perspectives and politics. And I think that's a responsibility of all historians to fight against those. And I think when you work internationally and connect with people globally and communities globally, that really empowers you to take more action along those lines. Secondly, I guess doing public history internationally just opens up to a lot of new possibilities for rethinking public history itself, thinking about what it is, thinking about why we do it, and thinking more importantly about how we do it. So working internationally challenges the field and opens up the field for a lot of discussion and a lot of collaborative work, obviously, that pushes the boundaries of the field very effectively and importantly. And then lastly, for me, I think engaging with public, and this is a personal reflection really, personally, I've found public history working with people internationally has raised questions about what counts as public history, about who are public historians, and about the publics of public history. So I think becoming aware of how public history is practiced internationally really has changed my own personal assumptions about the field itself. And it's troubled in all the best ways my sense of my understanding of history as a discipline, not just the field of public history, but history as a discipline and how we practice it, how we do it. So those are, yeah, partly why I'm committed to the project of international public history. It's an activist position, but it's also a sort of theoretical approach issue as well. I don't want to go talk about a philosophy of history, but I think it has changed to some extent what I think the field is and what our discipline is. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, David. In my screen, we will continue with Srijan. Srijan, why are you committed to the project of international public history?
Suppose we usually hate playing the location card, but if you're located in the global south in a country like India, you're almost inevitably by default committed to the project of public history, given that public history as a discipline emerged in the global north, in North America, then in Europe, and then Australia, and so on and so forth. So if you are not located in any of those places, but are interested in practicing public history or even practice public history without recognizing yourself as a public historian, or if you're interested in contributing to the global discourse, the global conversation, the global scholarship, or the global practice of public history, you almost inevitably have to be committed to the project of international public history because you lie outside the traditional, or, well, given that it's a very relatively young discipline, traditional might not be the right word, but the bastions or the dominant places where it has been practiced till now in the last few decades. So it's almost the inevitable consequence of location that has committed me to the project of international public history, because most of the theoretical insights, most of the scholarship does not reside in the global south. It is produced in the global north. It is about the global north. And in some ways, those of us who do not reside in the global north or do not work on the global north are constantly engaged in this act of translation, but not just an act of blind translation, but also an attempt to respond to it by talking about, like David mentioned, what it means to do public history in other places, in other countries, and other contexts. And therefore, again, the international public history as a project becomes almost inevitable for us to be part of that conversation. So that would broadly be my answer. Although I'm not sure if this was very coherent. Thanks.
Thank you, Shriyan. In my screen, we continue with Joanna. Joanna, why are you committed to the project of international public history?
Well, I should subscribe totally to what both David and Shriyan have already told here. Though Poland is somewhere between global north and global south. And if I wanted to talk about public history in Poland, there was hardly anyone to whom I could talk, because the very concept of public history is very, very new in Poland. So it was quite natural that any discussions must have been international in scope. So that's one thing. Any exchange of opinions, any discussions on the definition or whatever. Another thing, I come originally from teaching history or methodology of teaching history, and from history of education. And I did quite a lot of research on textbooks in the past, including the reading primers from different countries. And it was quite obvious there that each reading primer presented its own country as, the only and unique. And also the researchers in respective countries regarded their ways of teaching, on this primary level as somehow specific and unique. But if you look at all the different books, it turns out that they are very similar to one another. So the same can be applied also to public history. Every country is very unique, and or thinks about itself as very unique, and with their problems, with their history wars, there are specific features. But if you look at it globally, it turns out that there are lots of similarities. And I think this is an interesting thing, how your own country refers to those global discussions, global issues, also in the field of public history. Like David has already said, that it applies also to let's say regular history as much as to public history. So I think it just broadens the perspective and helps us to see our local things or our national things as part of something larger, something broader, which is an added value also to our local or national debates.
Thank you, Joanna. There's already a question in the chat, but I will wait until we finish this round, then pose the question, and then we'll go with the other question we have planned to discuss today. So Irmgard, it's your turn. Why are you committed to the project of international public history?
Yes, I would like to answer with a little bit with my biography, because I studied German economic history. And afterwards, I worked in our German National Museum. But there, I wasn't prepared for the work there, because I didn't know how to work with pictures, with objects, with films, with audio material. I wasn't prepared to work in a team, and I wasn't prepared how to think what people who haven't studied history might be interested in, and how to present history in a interesting way. So I learned a lot of these things in this special museum, but I also started to look how other museums are doing their jobs. And then I started to travel and recognized that we have a very German way in museums, with a strong concentration on objects, on professional curators who think themselves as a kind of artists, and sometimes forgot the visitors, and a strong focus on serious history. In other countries, there are more project work, more engagement with the audience, more, I would like to say more fun, and the visitors are more in the focus. And this is that when I started to think that it is important to have a more international way to look on public history. And not only in museums, of course, but also on other examples, for examples, documentaries or books. When I started to read British history books, they are so much easier to understand, and they are so much written more interesting than German books. You shouldn't try that. And I think international public history is an important opportunity to learn more from other experiences and from the way how others are doing public history. And this is not only to learn more about comparisons, but also about the differences we have in doing public history. And this is why I am committed to the project of international public history.
Thank you, Irmgard. So I guess it's my turn now. I would like to copy a little bit about Irmgard's approach. Also, I can talk about my own experience. My first degree is in anthropology, and I was like a very committed anthropologist for a lot of years. And I started working, my first job was in a museum and curating exhibitions and stuff, but I didn't know the such a thing as public history existed. I didn't know what was that. And also I worked with a lot of colleagues, and we did public history without knowing it was that. It was until the year 2016, if I'm not wrong, that I was doing my PhD in history, that I was at the conference of the IFPH in Colombia. I was a presenter there, but I also met a lot of people there, and I realized, oh, I have been doing public history without knowing it. So that encouraged me to keep going, because then I knew there was like a field that where I could fit, because sometimes I always thought, okay, I'm interested in people knowing what I'm doing, in not being so academic, in bringing knowledge and participation, etc., things to the audiences. So I thought, okay, this could be a good thing. Immediately, I got involved with Explorers, and that really opened a whole new world for me. I started gathering news from Latin America to show that in Latin America there was a lot of public history, and that also came as a surprise for me, because there were a lot of people doing, like me, doing a public history without knowing they were doing public history. So right now, I'm committed to the project of international public history, not only to learn about what other countries and different approaches, but also to let the world know that Latin America, there's a very rich field, and there's a lot of people working in many fields that have to do with public history. There's a lot of activists, there's a lot of public historians and social justice. There's a lot of museums are very, very strong right now with digital humanities. So I think the frame of public history would like encompass all of us and would make us like perhaps become a little bit more stronger, as Latin American scholars have become stronger in the last years. Perhaps this like is a good way to show that we produce a lot of public history and knowledge and things related to public history. So that's why I'm committed to the project of public history. So I have a question from Ángel del Valle. He is from the Museum of the Holocaust in Guatemala. Would you say that public history is like what happened with the artists rejecting the academy and following their own criteria about doing art? So this is a question open for all of you. I don't know who wants to jump in and start. Perhaps we can go in the same order we did before.
Okay, that's a wonderful question, and there's certainly a perspective about the field that follows along those lines for sure. That there's a distinction between academic history and public history. And public history is more about practice, it's more about engagement, it's more about collaboration, it's more about interdisciplinarity, it's more about creativity and imagination, accepting your subjectivities as a historian. And many of those things, you could take any of those, and there would be academic historians who would resist. If we take subjectivity or using your creativity or using your imagination, who would, if they wouldn't resist that, they'd certainly find it very uncomfortable. But I happen to be someone who was trained as an academic historian. I was trained as early modern British historian in Aotearoa in New Zealand, and then in England, where I taught for a long time. And then I came to Canada, where I'm now I should say, just to acknowledge that I'm in Ottawa and I'm working on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe people, Algonquin people. It was there that I learned that I was actually a public historian. Actually, there's someone here, Del Muse, I think is here, who actually sort of told me and mentored me, told me I was a public historian. And I think my reaction at the time, if I remember rightly, was, no, I'm not, I'm an activist. But he pointed out that all the things I've been doing in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and in England was an activist sort of involvement in the society and public representations of the past in the communities that I was living in. And that was public history. I might call it activist history or history workshop, which is what the affiliation was in the UK, especially. That in North America, that was public history. And now, I wouldn't say that's in opposition to academic history, but there's a tension for sure between academic history and that. And as I said, it's about you're engaging, accepting your own subjectivities, making that transparent, making that visible. It's about collaborating with non-professional historians in collaborative work. It's especially about paying attention to publics and how publics react to your work and are involved in your work. And all of those things, I think, are yeah, I guess you could say it's like the reference you had, Angel. It's the reaction to the sort of privilege and perceived elitism of academic history, who often see themselves as a sort of the pure form. And as Joanna indicated in her language a minute ago, we struggle as public historians with what we call other historians. Do we call them normal historians? Do we call them regular historians? And regular is a good word. I tend to call them traditional historians, which drives them nuts, because the radical social historians, for example, or feminist historians don't like being called traditional historians. But so we struggle with that. I would just say that, when we think of the field of public history, we have to remember, though, that there's a whole dimension of our field that is public and is about the public and how we engage and pay attention to publics. But the word history is there too. And we all are, many of us were trained as academic historians or involved in academic history. And we shouldn't lose sight that we're part of that discipline. And so there's many synergies between what we do. So, a regular historian is just as likely to make or less likely perhaps, but could make a documentary film, just like a public historian could make a documentary film. And so we shouldn't tie ourselves down to genre either, or media either, because those are crossovers. Sorry, that was a very long answer, Helena, sorry.
It was a great answer. Thank you, David. I have here a comment from Michael Kowalinski. He is right now in Brazil. He was one of our guests for the last Explorers we did. It was a great Explorers between Brazil and Argentina. He says, I have worked with artists and audiences, and experiences have been very productive. I try to establish relationships between public history and public art, new generation, and use the pop-up museum protocol in public spaces. How do you evaluate these approaches? That's another question, but before answering Michael Kowalinski's, if anyone wants to answer also Angel's first question?
Perhaps.
Irmgard.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize on that public history is, I think we are not rejecting the academy. We are also part of the academy. And yes, at my university, public history is a part of the history department. And so we work so I think of myself as a public historian, even if I'm not really working outside, but I'm doing projects, mostly with students, for the public. And I'm working together with people who didn't know that they are public historians. And I say, okay, you are doing a documentary, for example, and history documentary. So I think you are a public historian, and I invite you to come to us to the university and tell us something about your experiences at your work. And so I hope to bring them together, and I feel myself as a public historian at the academy. So.
Thank you, Irmgard. Joanna, you're on mute.
Yeah, so I think it's not that much about public historians rejecting academy, but it's rather what Irmgard said, that they just don't care. A lot of people who are practicing public history, they don't care about academy. It's not their conscious choice, let's say. It's rather we academic public historians who tell them, oh, come on, you are public historians, and they are just doing their jobs. They are making documentaries or video games related to history, or doing, I don't know, Hollywood cinema productions. And it's really like perhaps more important for us to identify them as public historians than for them, because fame and money is with them. Of course, another group are those grassroots public historians, like history enthusiasts. But then again, they are occupied with their businesses, and they also do not care that much about academic public history. However, I would not diminish this academic section of public history, which helps conceptualize it and also somehow produces theoretical background and shows to all those stakeholders that they have something in common and that they are part of something bigger than just their particular activities and their particular projects, which is quite important, because they don't have to, or perhaps their successor will be able not to start from the scratch, but to build on what has already been conceptualized.
Srijan, would you like to add something?
Well, I think everyone else here has already added everything that at least that I could come up with, so I wouldn't want to repeat the same thing.
Okay, thank you. I would like to add just a few, just a very brief comment. I also agree with what you're saying, but I also think, I mean, we all work in universities that are academic, and we're trying to do public history from there. So that also creates sometimes, not always, but sometimes attention. Some colleagues would tell me that's not real history. You're just doing some, you're too much of an anthropologist, for example. And at first I was offended, but now I feel very flattered, because that means I'm getting to the people. And for me, having such a strong background in anthropology, fieldwork and getting to the people, it's like the most important thing. And that's how I use public history, to get message to the people that for some reason don't have the access they would like to or want to for a certain topic. So that's just like my personal view. Michael, your question, I don't know if the steering committee and everybody here is acquainted with the project of pop-up museums. If you would like to tell us a little bit about the pop-up museums, and then we can tell you what we think about it. Hello? He's having problems with the audio. So I can tell you a little bit about the project of pop-up museums. I was part of the last edition. I don't know if you're acquainted with it. Michael in Brazil makes like this event that people present in a video and very briefly, like a case study of a museum, but it's very short, very precise, very fast, and it's very active and it's very dynamic. And I think it works quite well, because you just have to say what you're going to say, and people can have like many kinds of different options. The last time, if I'm not wrong, of all the presentations Michael gathered, he was able to make a book, an ebook that it's open access and everybody, and it's very interesting because you can see all the different kind of museums that are in Latin America and their projects and how they reach people. So if I'm not wrong, he's asking what do you believe of these kinds of approaches? So we can start again with David, Irmgard, Joanna, and Srijan.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an ideal project in terms of public history work. It's, I mean, I guess I wouldn't comment on it too much because I'm not that familiar with the project, but I know that in what I do work more closely with, which is performance studies, pop-up performances in public spaces is a really important way of engaging publics with the past, leading them to question the past. And I noticed Eliane has made a comment too about art and public history, which I think is absolutely right, that it's an important lever in First Nations, Indigenous issues and histories and politics. It's in Canada, and I think I would say that's true of Australia and New Zealand, Aotearoa, and so on. I think that the relationship between these sorts of creative projects, these sorts of artistic projects, and public history is really profound. I think it challenges well, it's doing history off the page, right? It's doing history off the written page, and I think that has its own challenges, but its own contributions too. And I think it's more accessible for people. It encourages, just like live theater can do, it encourages talkbacks and playbacks and all sorts of engagements backwards and forwards, which I think is a tension for some academic historians, because it does, I think as a historian, if you're involved in those projects, you're one of your contribution is just one of many contributions, and your contribution might actually be one of the least important ones in terms of the final product. And that's hard for us as academically trained historians, because we've got a lot of ego, we've got a lot of, we're always the alpha person in the room, and suddenly we're not. We're someone who's making a small contribution to something that is really profound and is really significant, and an important contribution. I'm not saying it isn't, but it's just we're one of many, and that's part of sharing authority and collaborative work. I think also it's the creativity of it and the openness to using your imagination and filling the gaps with your creativity is something that I personally have learned through the theater work to be more open to and more excited by and more open to the possibilities of that, which has, led me back to reading theorists like Collingwood or Croce and so on in my own discipline of history. I think where the problem comes, where I experience this as a sort of segue into the next question, but one of the points at which some of my colleagues find it very difficult to support the sort of teaching I'm doing is that I get students to dance, I get students to film, I get students to paint, I get students to knit. I've got an exam coming up later today where the student is knitting her work, her final essay for me. And evaluating those is very challenging for academics, because we're used to examining written things and books and articles and theses, and the essay is as a sort of model of those things. But a music dance routine is not, right? And so knitting, how am I going to assess someone who's knitting her essay? And the answer to that is that I have to embrace the creativity, embrace the possibilities, but I also have to learn something about the medium, so that I actually have some critical edge so that my evaluation of it is as rigorous and as serious as my evaluation of a written essay. So I think that's, one of the challenges of these public art projects or the pop-up museums is how, as historians, we participate in them, how we surrender authority as we're part of a team creating these things, but also maybe how we evaluate these approaches, which is Michael's last question, which is a challenge for sure. We're vulnerable and we're out of our comfort zone. And personally, I find that really exciting and really challenging, and I love it. but it's uncomfortable for sure. It's troubling, it's uncomfortable, and it's messy. And, you know, maybe that's a good definition of public history. Troubling, messy, makes you uncomfortable. But
I like that definition, actually. I'm going to read an comment here from Elaine Belek. If I may, what Mr. Dean said, it seems to me that public history projects challenge for both academia and museums the hierarchy of mediation. The public or groups involved have to be given a space that's an equal voice that disturbs a lot of people. And we have another, the other was just thanks David Dean from Michael. I don't know if the other members of the steering committee would like to also answer to Michael Kowaliński. What do you think about these kinds of projects, Irmgard?
Me too. I'm not familiar with the project of a pop-up museum, but I think it sounds very interesting and also very productive. So I would like to do these works, and I would like to do this interdisciplinary work together with artists. I would like to try to do that. And for the question about how to evaluate this, so we are at my university, our students still have to write texts, and we don't accept anything else. So how to evaluate, we still don't know how to evaluate, for example, a website, a concept, or a film, or so I don't know how we should do that with an art project. It would be really difficult. I think first our university system has to change.
Thank you, Irmgard. Joanna, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think what Michael writes, and also what we are discussing here, what David has mentioned a couple of times, it's the role of public in public history, that it's not just an addition, but it's really an important factor, subject of public history, and and it's not just the audience, it's not just public, it's not just the recipients of what public historians do to them or offer them, but they also have their preferences, and we cannot take their interest in history for granted. That's what academic historians often do. No matter how boring the book is, it's based on a solid research, so it means that it is important and should be read and cited, while general public does not really care on how deep it is. It must be interesting and involving, and that's a totally different shift. As I mentioned, I come from the field of teaching history, and teaching history has this academic concept. I mean, it's also a matter of exercising power, that you have the pupils who have to learn, and you have to make them learn and to check if they learned properly. But then when you have museum public or readers, or I don't know, video gamers, they don't have to do anything. It's your business to engage them, and you have to think how to engage them, because otherwise they will find something else, something more engaging, more interesting, and they will spend their time and money there. So I think that's the difficult thing for regular traditional academic historians, so however we call them. But in terms of our students, I think the fact that public history is not so popular as a program, at least in Wrocław, it also kind of changed the relations between us professors and the students, because we have to take care of the students and to encourage them and to show them that it's something different than traditional history. And the students, in fact, appreciate it, but it required and still requires some work from us, and this kind of being open, but it also requires a kind of change in of the students' approach. For example, some of my students want to write their thesis on, let's say, some video games or films. But their first approach is to check how accurate they are in terms of, history, how accurate they reflect the past or present the past, how accurately. And then it requires a lot of discussion to agree that public history is not about being as true to the past as possible, but there are also other factors, and that their thesis does not have to be like a super review of the film or of the game or of a comic book, but it should have taken into consideration also other factors. And I think it's an important thing in the process of the public history program to see that it's not only history, but it really has to deal with the public.
Thank you, Joanna. Srijan, would you like to add something?
Yes. Again, I'm not familiar with the project in question, but it does remind me of an initiative that has been started at a university in India, in New Delhi, called the Ambedkar University, where there's a center called Center for Community and Knowledge, and they work a lot with neighborhood museums, where the idea is you go into a neighborhood, you engage the people in the neighborhood, you take objects and things that are meaningful and important to them, you set up a pop-up museum, which then lasts for maybe a few weeks or a few days, and then boom, you go to the next neighborhood. So in that way, there isn't a lot of involvement of public art per se there, but it is, I know that the center is interdisciplinary, and therefore it has more than historians working on it. And in terms of the evaluation of it, I mean, evaluation can be thought of in two ways. If you're thinking of evaluation within an institutional context, which is what we were discussing here, like the Center for Public History is located in an art and design institute. So every time, like we've had students who've done a podcast as their final thesis project for oral history, or they have done something else. So then we have access to artists and designers on campus and among colleagues who have the wherewithal to be able to evaluate such things academically, so that you know that, because otherwise as a historian, even as a public historian, like David said, it's not really our training to be able to evaluate these things. And therefore we might end up being very impressed by the history that's being done, but maybe as a podcast, it fails. Maybe as a film, it fails. Maybe as an art installation, it fails. So we don't have the wherewithal to be able to evaluate it in that way. So we do need to draw on those colleagues for such evaluation. And I suppose a more general notion, I wonder if we do enough evaluation, like even for certain small initiatives, or whether it's public history projects in India that I'm familiar with, there isn't a very rigorous process of evaluating whether or not it's effective in conveying whatever past you want to convey, it is effective in engaging the public that you would hope to engage. I have not come across a lot of follow-up of that kind. So maybe that is something that we also need to think about, and not be satisfied by the initiative that a project promises. Because it's then akin to what academic historians do, is that the publication of an article is the point. Whether or not anyone read it is not the point. So similarly, this is something for us to think about, or at least I wonder in the Indian context, certainly.
Thank you, Srijan. I want to welcome the president of the Federation for Public History. She is here. Tanya, welcome. I must apologize. There was some kind of mix-up with the time, so we're glad you're here. And I suggest that I have just a very brief comment about the pop-up museums, and then we will give the floor to Tanya. And then there's another question from Hamish McLean that I will read for you. So very briefly, I had the privilege to participate in the last version of the pop-up museums done by Michael. And it, of course, it's a public history exercise, but it was very hard for me it was supposed to be like a 5-minute video, but it was very hard for me not to be an academic doing the video. the chip in my head was, like Joanna mentioned, I have to be accurate. I have to rely, the sources have to be very well conveyed. So it took me a while and a lot of attempts to do actually a video that was friendly enough, but also historical enough, if you want. But it also depends, like in the people who are practicing public history, it's sometimes hard because of our training and where we are teaching, etc., to find like the balance or take out the chip of an academic to become a public historian. So that's also like attention I think we have all the time. So just a brief comment, but the project is wonderful. It was a lot of fun. So Tanya, welcome. We are very glad you are here. So we would like to ask you, before going to Hamish's question, why are you committed to the project of international public history?
I feel like I've just sort of kind of flown in, and I apologize for being late. So I was having panics yesterday about the timing. I kept seeing the 5 a.m. So I thought I'm okay with 5 a.m. But it's great to see Hamish, a student here. Thank you so much for turning up on time. Can you just give me a little précis of what everybody has discussed so far? Would that be okay? So I could get a sense of what have you been talking about?
Yes, we have been just answered the first question. Why are we committed to the project of international public history? So each one of the members of the steering committee have answered that question. But then there has been a lot of questions, like the pop-up museums that were a project that was happening in Brazil. That what do we think about art and public history? I'm sorry, let me see what else, if somebody can help me also. Well, like the tension between academic history and public history, how we got to public history, how do we consider ourselves public historians, just things like that. I hope I'm not missing anything. So just that. We haven't got to, we haven't got to the second one.
Okay, no worries. Well, look, many of you will know that I trained as a historian in Britain and obviously moved to Australia about 14 years ago. So I've always understood myself as moving between different national contexts. And I think that's absolutely crucial to the project of international public history. For me, it's all about communicating with colleagues around the world, lots of whom work in different fields, in academia, but also practicing public history in the GLAM sector or elsewhere in the media. And I think what's really important to me and why I'm committed to the project of public history is that I think we need to spread our message as far and wide as possible, because we live in a time, and we have done for a little while, where in many of national contexts where the arts and humanities are under attack, or certainly dismissed by governments and others. And it's really vital that historians emphasize the value of historical thinking and history with a capital H as well as a little h for all, far and wide, and the benefits, the cultural and social and political benefits of public history learning, teaching and community engagement for everyone. And I think we do that best as an international community. We do that best when we compare and contrast the types of different public history work we are undertaking as scholars and practitioners, and we learn from each other in that process, and we communicate with audiences far and wide, not just within our national boundaries, but across national boundaries. And we constantly question what is the nation. And I think that's really crucial to the work that I'm doing as a public historian, but I also think it's crucial to the work that others are doing. And you know what? It's really fun, right? Working in international public history. It's really, really fun. And now that international borders are open again, it's going to get funner. And I know I can't wait until we meet in Berlin and see what's happened, right, in the last few years, because there has been this kind of brief, well, not brief at all, 2 years where we haven't had a chance to communicate in the ways that we had done previously. And I think I first became involved with the IFPH back in 2016. which isn't all that long ago, but seems like a little while ago at times. And I know I've benefited enormously from communicating with colleagues and knowing that we're part of a shared project and we have a shared purpose to impart the value of history to colleagues and to audiences far and wide. So yeah, that's why I'm completely committed to the project, and I adore working with my colleagues here before me on this lovely screen. And I look forward to hearing more from you. And I'm still so sorry I was late.
Oh, thank you, Tanya, so much. I also apologize. There was a mix-up with the schedule. I will be also more careful next time. It's confusing for me still. But I have a question from Hamish from the audience. I'm going to read it. He says, if content creation is fundamentally what public historians do, how do you think the mediums and methods used will change in the coming years, especially in the shadow of the internet, which has effectively infinite demand for content consumption? So should we keep the order we were doing, like David, Irmgard, Joanna, Srijan, and Tanya?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay.
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 Yeah, thanks, Hamish, for that. It's a great question, and I mean, I'll just speak through what my students would like to do and what mediums so they're still working with traditional mediums, if we can call that. They're making documentary films. Some of them are creating game design documents for video games. Some of them are painting. Some of them are dancing. Some of them are knitting, as I said. And some of them are creating board games and going back to that sort of. So there is a sort of, so I wouldn't say there's a fluidity between mediums that we are more familiar with. I'm more familiar with exhibits, that sort of thing, podcasts, video documentaries, whatever, poetry, whatever. But also I see a huge shift into the digital. So we have a digital humanities program here at Carleton and students can take it at the same time as the public history MA. They can also do a curatorial diploma. And over the last 10 years, I've seen students shift from doing the public history and the curatorial diploma to doing public history and the digital humanities. In fact, most of them are doing digital humanities. What that means is that their final projects are creating digital platforms, they're creating soundscapes, they're creating digital podcasts, they're creating walking tours. So I think I'm anticipating over the next few years that will just expand. They'll carry on doing digital, giving themselves a digital presence. And that is a really global audience that they're appealing to. But the other thing that I'm starting to find really interesting is that there's also a commitment to engage with social media. So not just Facebook and Twitter, but to actually start doing things on other platforms. And that I think that's quite exciting. And actually engaging with publics in those spaces. So, so looking at how people are posting images of the Holocaust or Holocaust sites on Instagram and making comments on there, my students are sort of weighing in that and having dialogues and discussions there. And I'm finding that on other like video game platforms, they're engaging with other players on that sort of platform. I don't know, we wouldn't call that crowdsourcing, it's crowd engagement, and it's a global crowd engagement. And they're deliberately intervening in those places, putting out questions, putting out ideas, getting the feedback, having those discussions. So I think that's really quite exciting. So I anticipate that being something that will be moving forward too, is engaging with and maybe even creating forums like that for public engagement with the internet, which is, I like this phrase, the shadow of the internet. We all work in the shadow of the internet. Yeah. But anyway, that's.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. Irmgard.
Yeah, I like the question, how do you think the medium will change the coming years? And I think they already have changed us and our connection with our students because a lot of things change. And I think I'm learning a lot of these things from my students because they know a lot of, much more about the things in the shadow of the internet than me. and I've learned or they taught me so much about history on Instagram or on Twitter I haven't known before, and I think perhaps this working together with people outside of the academy will be is growing, and that there is the internet changed, or perhaps I think when it started we all hoped it will democratize the history or the way how we learn or how we see and how we know something about history. And I think this is on the way now, and it's obviously that it is not limited to us historians anymore, and that there are a lot of people doing public history, and we I think we should try to know more about all these products, and I'm doing that by listening to my students. Okay,
thank you, Irmgard. Joanna.
Yeah, I think it's not also the matter of doing public history, but also about researching public history, because my impression is that it was happening before, I mean, this democratization and the fact that the stories about the past were not conveyed only in academia, but thanks to the social media, we have an opportunity as researchers to, let's say, eavesdrop or to research it, because we can, you can join a group and not necessarily intervene like David's students, but just have a look at what's going on there, what the discussions are, what aspects are tackled, what attitudes are promoted, not only very good ones, also xenophobic or nationalist, but at least you know what's happening in different circles. And if you put some effort, you can leave your bubble and look what the people from outside of your bubble are doing. One of my students, for example, did research on TripAdvisor, on the comments posted there, which is an instrument of shaping, public attitudes towards the past and public knowledge about the past. And internet also gives this international or global dimension, at least to a certain extent. Of course, well, in Poland, we are sort of limited by the language, but nevertheless, you can see the Polish names also in the English speaking sites. So those international exchanges are also interesting, both in terms of research and in terms of just exchanges. That's something I think relatively new to public history, and possible thanks to internet and thanks to the social media. Just like now those exchanges concerning the war in Ukraine, when all the historical arguments are also voiced in English, in Russian, in Ukrainian, and in other languages. So that's fascinating, in fact.
Thank you, Joanna. Srijan.
So, like David and others said, it's the move to the digital that's the biggest change that's happening. Whether it's students, whether it's colleagues, everyone's trying to go digital in some form or another. It just seems cheaper and more feasible. Maybe that's the reason. And yes, you are absolutely right that content consumption, there appears to be an infinite demand for it. But what I'm starting to notice is that there is a gap between content creation and content consumption, and that bridge is not really being built. So, for example, archiving is something that appears to be exploding in India, to the extent that I have students of art and design who are interested in archiving, who are going out and archiving different themes and creating digital platforms where these oral history archives, story archives, or archives of some form or another are stored. The issue is anyone actually using them? And there the answer is more likely no. So when it comes to the user of archives, which goes back to the academic historian, they will still go to the archives run by public institutions, large institutions, the government, the state, or maybe some large corporations. But these smaller archives, which are leveraging the power of the digital to exist and to put content and create content, they're just not penetrating into this demand for content. And there appears to be a gap. And again, I feel it comes back to the other point that I was making, that your intent might be public engagement, but whether you're achieving public engagement, there is a gap there, and that gap is not necessarily being addressed all the time. The intent seems to suffice.
Thank you, Sreja and Tanya.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said so far. And I think that public history scholars have become increasingly aware of more about the production of public history in the diverse forms that David was talking about. And David has much more experience than most with regards to his students about the kind of creation of public history in all these different forms. But what we don't know is exactly as Srijan has suggested about the consumption of public history. You know, I've had a foray into history on television, and, you know, I tried to research the impact of engaging with the kind of global television series, Who Do You Think You Are, for example. But, you know, we know much more about the production of history on television than we do about its consumption. You know, what our audience is getting from documentaries, what our audience is learning about history from historical film, you know, and I think we have so much to learn, and there are opportunities to do so. And we have we really should be analysing how people are consuming history and whether our work is wasted or not, as I think Srijan was suggesting, because there's no point doing work unless people are engaging with it. And I do think we need to learn more about that. For me, one of the things, and colleagues here will be aware of this, one of the things that's really excited me is trying to bring together the sort of innovative, creative engagement with history in its diverse forms with scholarship. So I've really tried to encourage more work on creative practice, PhDs and higher degree research. And I would like to have many more students engaging with creative forms of history at higher degree level. And of course, for a long time, you know, the academy has taken its while to value this kind of scholarship, to see historical documentaries as PhD work, for example. But I also would love, you know, we have seen this kind of efflorescence of podcasting, for example. It would be amazing to see more of an engagement with podcasting at a higher degree research level as well. I'm also really interested in creative nonfiction, just like I know David is, and in terms of all his drama performances as well. And really, I would love to have much more international communication about this kind of work. I would love, you know, those of us who work in universities and are bound by kind of incredible bureaucratic structures, you know, so PhD research and examination is immensely bureaucratic, and it would be great to see some of that bureaucracy fall away so that we can really benefit from international supervision and examination. You know, most of us aren't bound by the kind of bureaucracy. We want to encourage scholarship and creative practice in public history all around the world, and it would be great to facilitate that. It will probably take decades, right? But I think it would be good to see some more work in that area.
Thank you, Tanya. I want to refer briefly to my experience with the Explorers. This semester, I had the fortune to work with some interns of Macquarie University, thanks to Tanya. Two of them are here, Hamish, who posed a question, and Ashley Morgan. And when I started doing the Explorers, like in this format in 2020, it was in the pandemic. So this format, like doing this kind of events monthly, were good in the sense that things were being said and there was a lot of content being produced, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the interns this semester have made me realize that, for example, for young audiences, sometimes this kind of content is not appealing. And for me, it's important that younger students have at least some kind of interest. So they have been started working on rebranding some of the videos, making them shorter and like a little bit more attractive so they can get more views. And they are also working on an Instagram idea and also with a podcast idea. And that, to be honest, had never occurred to me before. So I think it's also important to learn from the younger people like Hamish and Ashley, what are the ways they want also to receive that kind of content. So that for the Explorers has been very like enriching, and I think that's something that I also want to learn more and more about. So so we can, oh, there's a comment here from Hamish. Amazing, thank you all. I have another question. What is your advice for someone seeking a career in public history, especially considering how fluid the field is professionally? If you want to answer this one, and then we'll go to our second question, we can start again with David. You're muted.
Yep, sorry.
Oh,
yeah, the field is very fluid. I would say, first of all, be as open to all possibilities as you can, and don't limit yourself to thinking, you know, your public history, you're going to be an archivist, or you're going to work as a curator in a museum, or you're going to do this, you're going to do that. Be open to all of those possibilities. And I think that means you basically want the most amazing toolbox in the world, right? And the toolbox might have some digital in it. It might have some exhibit experience, and push your professors to be open to those sorts of possibilities and to allow you to explore those things. I'd say be very clear to yourself and be honest with yourself about your subjectivity and how you approach the past, and embrace that. Enhance your skill set. Network like mad. That's really important. And this is also what I think something like Explorers and bridging our blog and just being here today enables you to network internationally as well. So don't shut yourself off to those possibilities too. We talked at the outset about transnational global histories and how that has transformed public history. Don't think of yourself in a nationalist straitjacket. So think about methodologies and theories and approaches and with different ways of doing, because that's the skill set, not the sort of, you know, I know everything about Tasmania between 1840 and 1890. That it's those skill set that's going to get you that job. I've had students, public history students, do projects. I had one, for example, work on a project on early modern England and performances of the past in early modern England in theatre. And she got a job with the Canadian government working on a really crucial portfolio right now, because they didn't really care that she didn't have the content knowledge. They needed a skill set, and that didn't matter what period she'd worked on. So yeah, I would, that's my suggestions anyway. Sorry, bit rambling.
Thank you, David. In regard.
Yeah, and but I would underline all what David said. I think these are all the really important things. Perhaps I just would like to add that you should do what you are really interested in, and then this is the best way to find a job, then, because you are good in the field you are really interested in. This is yes, how I think I got my job.
Thank you, in regard. Joanna.
I would add, keep your eyes open, because history is everywhere, not only where you expect it. And there are some non-obvious opportunities to be engaged as public historians and as public historian, and to use both skills and knowledge.
Thank you, Srijan.
I would say that beyond looking for jobs, what I've been surprised by in terms of public history, at least as the way it's practiced in India, is the number of independent consultants that have emerged and the number of people who are attempting entrepreneurship and trying to make that work. And first of all, I admire their gumption because I would never be able to do it. But that seems to be an increasingly viable route. So I would never connect history with entrepreneurship. But apparently you can be an entrepreneur even if you're a historian and a public historian, and you can really make it work. So that is something to consider if your context, your local context allows for such opportunities. Apparently that's a theme.
Thank you, Tanya.
I was going to say, and it's absolutely a thing in Australia too. I mean, you may not earn millions, but you certainly can make a living, or you could make a part of a living. And I suppose that's it. You know, people tend to put that toolbox to lots of different uses and piece together lots of different kinds of work. I mean, Hamish, you hear from me every week on this, so I probably don't need to spend much time articulating my response to your question. But, you know, and I'll repeat something that I say all the time, and it's partly linked to what David said. Young people, older people, whoever, sometimes need to get better at articulating what their skill set is, right? And working out how to communicate to others how it can be used for different purposes. So, for example, the student that worked on early modern drama can you know, sell their skills to the government. And I think that's where that gap needs to be filled sometimes. It just needs to make, I mean, actually, I think it's not just for me, and I've written about this and I've talked about this with you, Hamish, and other students. This isn't about getting jobs, right? Always, although clearly getting jobs is important. We need to earn money to live and to survive. But it's actually just about articulating the value of history to our loved ones, our friends, our family, our lovers. You know, it's if people don't understand that, then that's a shame, right? And I think we need to be able to articulate the value of history to everyone, not just employers. So, you know, why is history important? Why are the skills that we learn when we're being trained as historians important, and how they can be used for different purposes? So that would be my answer to that.
Yes, I think everybody has said the same thing, but I would like also to emphasize, Hamish, in what Irmgard said about like loving what you do. When you are really passionate about what you do and you love it, you will be good at it anyway. And it will make it easier to convince people that you have certain skills for doing the job. When I graduated recently from my PhD, and during my last semester, there was a whole class devoted to train us to sell our skills instead of just tell employers, oh, we are historians. No, but then what do you know? What do you do? What are you good at? So there was a lot of different skills and tests and things that we have to fill in, just to also for us to understand that we were good, for example, processing lots of information or summarizing things. Like those skills would sell. That's what they told me in my university, will help you to sell yourself instead of saying I'm a historian of Latin America. So that's also like more or less what you have said. Oh, there's another question here from Ashley Morgan. How do you tackle the disconnect between academic public history and academic forms of history, and how the public interacts with history, but knowingly and unknowingly informs, like theater, documentary, film, gaming, etc.? Should we start with David again?
Okay. I'm not sure how much there is a disconnect, to be honest with you. I think there's a lot of collaboration and fluidity between those forms. So, you know, I mentioned earlier that I have, you know, we have students, so my colleague Sean Graham, who is the digital historian in my department, we have supervised students who are developing game design documents for gaming. Our most recent PhD student carried out a series of oral histories about strikes in Sudbury. His name is Rick Duthie. He did oral histories on the strikes in Sudbury. He wrote a script based on those oral histories. He then staged, produced, and directed a play in a working class facility, a community center, where the audience were some of the people who he'd interviewed. He then did talkbacks afterwards, which got their reactions to it. And so basically oral histories, scripting the oral histories, directing a play and then following up with audience engagement and playback, so that this was actually somewhere where we did what Tanya was saying is often missing, where we did know what the audience thought, and the audience really came back, and he wrote his thesis based on that. But the script and the performance were part of the PhD, and so the examiners had to watch the play, they had to look at the play, they had to read the script, and so on. So I think, in fact, that there is a lot of synergy actually happening. I think this is where it's very exciting, where between these sorts of these disconnects, which are absolutely right, Ashley, they were there, they're very strong, that we still come across them sometimes from colleagues and others, that disconnection is being broken down, and that there is this interaction with if I can say, writing history in scripts, writing history in documentary film, writing history in a video game, writing history in an exhibit, rather than writing history just as a thesis. And so I think that is, yeah. So do we need to tackle it? Yes. Do we need to be sensitive to it? Yes. Do we need to encourage it and drive it forward and learn from it? Absolutely. I mean, as Tanya mentioned, I've learned hugely from my students. You know, I don't read comic books and graphic novels very much anymore. When I have a student who is writing her thesis as a graphic novel, she helped educate me on how I would assess it in terms of how you read a graphic novel, how you understand what different graphic novelists have done in terms of their use of boundaries and shapes and borders and the different styles. And that's awesome, right? It's just exciting and thrilling and challenging and humbling and you know, hard too. Yeah, sorry, too long again.
Thank you, David. Irmgard.
Yeah, but it's great because it's great to be second after David, because I can just always start with, yes, I would underline this. And I think I don't have to add anything. Only that perhaps, yes, how the public interacts with history, that is what our research is about. So this is a wonderful question, but I don't have a small answer for that. And so I will stop here by just say that David already answered it much better than I would ever do it.
Thank you, Irmgard. Joanna.
I should say the same. Maybe one thing that we kind of take for granted, that academic history or regular history is something, you know, solid, established, and very stable, while in fact it's not. And I think there are also lots of tensions, struggles, conflicts, new methodologies, new approaches, and so on. And, you know, medieval historians regard modern historians or contemporary historians as just reading newspapers, while contemporary historians regarded medievalists rewriting the same thing for 100 times, etc. So I think public history can be just one more thing, academic public history. It intermingles into those debates and enlivens them in a positive way. I think I think it impacts also traditional academic history, and it's very positive. And that's why it's also important to conceptualize it and to be involved in those more theoretical discussions on public history, not only on public history practices, but also theories and connections with academic history, because then we borrow from academic history, traditional academic history, but we also have our impact on that field. So, yeah.
Thank you, Joanna. Srijan.
Well, one way of tackling it is to be a proselytizer of public history, which is what the very few of us who try to do it in India are trying, not very successfully, I sometimes feel. The other thing is that what has helped is that because public history as a discipline has been around for now more than 50 years formally, and you know, there are recognized journals, there are recognized book series that are recognized. So there are the parameters that academic historians look for when they measure the worth of a publication, those things exist. And when you point to that, and when you say that, you know, you're publishing in these places, and these are all legitimate in that way, legitimate sites of publication, legitimate sites of scholarship, that has helped thaw things. What has also helped is this answer to the second part of your question, is that as far as the South Asian context is concerned, the academic historian is irrelevant to the way the public thinks about the past or talks about the past. As far as the public is concerned, the academic historian is the problem, because they are biased, they are influenced by the West, they have no respect for the nation, and so on and so forth. So therefore, there has been a much delayed realization that we cannot just stay within the academy. We must find ways of engaging the public about the past that goes beyond school textbooks, which has been the perennial obsession of historians in India, that we must control the content of textbooks. If you control the content of textbooks, you will automatically ensure that everyone learns the right kind of history. Of course, nobody learns their history from textbooks, which is the other problem. So you're making an assumption, and then you're going with that assumption, and then you're seeing that, okay, it makes no difference at all. So that has kind of, there's a small change. There was only one, we were the only one. Now there are three more who are recognizing that public history should be a specialization for undergraduate degrees, or should be a specialization at the graduate level. There should be courses on it. We should talk about it, learn more about it, and really think about how to engage the public without being rendered further irrelevant as professionals engaging the public. So that would be my answer.
Thank you, Srijan. And Tanya?
Yeah, I mean, within Australia and Britain is another context I know well, academic historians do need to engage much more with the public than they used to. They're obliged to by the funding bodies that if they get government funding, they do have to think about communicating with the public, and they do have to display that they are communicating, disseminating their research as far as possible. But that said, some academic historians may never understand themselves as public historians, even if they do make historical documentaries, even if they do curate exhibitions. And I think it's important that they do understand that work as public history scholarship and engagement. And I do this, I think this is so because people need to value public history scholarship and practice better. And I think people need to be more obvious about and explicit about that work when they're doing it, and to understand they're making a contribution to public history knowledge in that process. And one of the ways I think that academic historians that don't understand themselves as public historians do this all the time, and this leads into our next question, is when they teach, right? So I'm surrounded by colleagues who so for example, teach medieval history, and the title of their unit starts with Game of Thrones, right? So people are constantly, when they're teaching and they're trying to encourage students to engage with their units, thinking about how their academic field is presented in the public today, whether that's through historical television programs and films or documentaries or games. All of my colleagues engage with these public forms of history when they teach, because it helps bring people in, right? It helps start conversations about the past. And I think they need to be more self-conscious about that process when they're doing it, because that helps bridge some of the disconnect. And like David and others have suggested, I don't think there is much of a disconnect, but I do think there is a disconnect between some of the work that academic historians are doing when they don't engage with the sub-discipline of public history. So I think that needs to be more explicit when they do that. But I think teaching is one of the key ways in which that happens.
Thank you, Tanya. I was just going to say something also briefly. I have noticed in the United States, at least, that there's like public history is becoming like very trendy. Now, like everybody has a project related to public history and also with digital humanities, but sometimes it is done lightly in the sense that it could be like anything. And I also think that we also have to still commit with a little bit, I don't want to say the word academic, but like be like rigorous a little bit. And also, and that in that sense, academic history can also help us. There's a lot of I don't know exactly the word in English, I'm sorry, when you dress up and do some kind of recreation of a historical event, there's a name for that. A lot of public historians in the United States do that, and they think that's enough. could be a good start, but I insist it's not enough. So there, that could be also something to tackle with both academic history and public history could work very well together. And having said reenactment, thank you. Yeah, having said this, I would like to go to our second question, and is how do we teach international public history? We have mentioned it a little before, but now we can develop it a little bit more. So David, again.
Okay, I'll keep it brief because I know we're almost at time. I mean, obviously, the starting point would be to get students to read internationally and to look at case studies from across the globe. They might not understand the context or be able to engage directly with the context of those studies, but what they can pull out of those are comparative approaches, differences, similarities. What I'm finding with my students when they read about a case study about something they really don't know much about the background of or the context of, is that what they come out of it with is those comparative points, but also some theoretical and methodological insights and different approaches, which we then pick up on those and apply them to things that they do know, into historical contexts or questions or issues that they do know, and perhaps engage in practicing those themselves. So it encourages a level of critical reading about the sort of national histories they're more comfortable with and more knowledgeable about. More significantly, I think in my teaching, I bring people from across the globe into my classroom as guests. As we've got a wonderful space where we can actually have workshops, so someone can run a workshop from wherever they are in the world. Drawing on the internet, I mean, I don't. One of the perhaps the only good thing about the pandemic has been that we've had amazing opportunities to have Zoom conversations with people around the world, but also that a lot of, in my case, theater companies have put amazing work now online. Artists have put on a lot of work online. Video things have been online. So for example, a few weeks ago, I'm going to ruin this name, Janasanskriti, which is a sort of Boal theater group that goes across villages across India. We were looking at that in my classroom and looking at a documentary on them, and you know, it was just fabulous to be able to bring that into my classroom as the theater example of performing history in theater, which came from India, whereas usually I've used more familiar means. So, and lastly, I think, and this is what I'm leading up to hopefully next year, is collaborative teaching, where literally I devise a course, create a course with someone overseas, hopefully two of us, and so 3 countries. Our students will collaborate on projects. We will work together in mentoring those students and evaluating them. So I think that is really where, in my and anticipating Hamish's question, where does this go from here? That's where I'm going. I'm going into collaborative teaching, but it isn't about me just collaborating with colleagues. It's about putting our students together to collaborate on certain projects, and we're going to create new monuments. That's our idea for this in our respective places. So,
thank you, David. In regard,
yeah. How do we teach international public history? First of all, at the Freie Universität, we do focus on German history in the 20th century, but of course with an international perspective, because we realize, and I hope our students too, that you can't speak about Germany in the 20th century without looking international. And so we try always to have excursions to go abroad, mostly to Poland, because it's not that far away. And it is very interesting what they are doing there in the field of public history. And we do have international workshops since some years, and together with students from or with the universities in Norway, Poland. We do have also a blended learning seminar international with Switzerland, Poland, Netherlands, France, about the myth of Europe and then we also try to go somewhere to Europe. This year, I think we will go to visit Brussels. There's a house of European history. This is, I think, also our way of looking international, and we are doing seminars, online seminars together, as David just told us. This is one plus from the pandemic, that we do have more of these these online seminars, and that we can do them international easier. And we support our students to do semesters abroad, and therefore at the moment we are starting plans for a cooperation with the planned international digital public history master program in Luxembourg, together with Thomas Covin, and we hope that it will start next year, and then we have really an international perspective on public history. And I think this is, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Irmgard. Joanna?
Well, one obvious thing is literature, of course, and using international, mostly English language literature. It's probably my disadvantage that I don't read German. So hopefully there are people who are using also rich and ever richer German literature. Another thing is receiving guests like Irmgard, but we also had a group of students from Paris. That's one of the benefits why Poland is not so distant and relatively cheap, I think. So our students and we at the university usually cannot afford going abroad, but nice people come to see us. Also a big chance is our public history summer school that the 4th edition is going to happen this year in June. And of course, our students are invited to participate as audience, and it's a great opportunity for them to see really international group of young scholars or students at their age, and presenting all the different perspective, approaches, topics, etc. Language is some barrier, but I think proficiency or fluency in English among Polish students is better and better. And I'm quite open to different opportunities that David mentioned of collaborative courses, collaborative also research that students did. We had a very nice project about German migration to Missouri, which happened from a German village, which happens to be part of Poland today. So our students could provide some local elements, including pictures, and we hope to continue it this year with again hosting the people, the descendants of the migrants, back to their ancestors' village in Silesia in Poland. So I think there are many opportunities, in fact, and thanks to the internet again, it's developing, it's growing, and hopefully, teaching public history will be more and more international in scope, especially that there are those standards and projects that were developed within the IFPH. So there are things available at hand that help develop such things.
Thank you, Joanna. Srijan?
So, given the paucity of public history scholarship in South Asia, on South Asia, you're inevitably teaching international public history because that's the only way you'll teach public history. There is no other option. But what it does help us do is that it provides you with the conceptual grounding or theoretical grounding, or even other comparative case studies to identify initiatives of public history that might be occurring in our own geographies and locations, which we could never have identified as such earlier. So to that extent, it has been useful. But one flaw that I have noticed in the way we teach international public history is that we are bound by the legacy of our colonial heritage. That is to say that because Portugal and France and the Netherlands failed to colonize India, we only speak English. And therefore, we only have access to work that comes to us in English. So if there is scholarship that has been translated into English, it potentially enters the classroom. But if it has not been, then it does not enter the classroom. We may be aware of it, but there is no way we have access to it, effective access to it, and no effective way of teaching it. As a result of which, for example, Latin American scholarship and the Latin American experience of public history is broadly hidden from us. The African experience is broadly hidden from us. Even the broader Asian experience is broadly hidden from us, until and unless they are being translated or spoken about or written about in the English language in international. When I say international, you basically mean North American and certain European pockets, Anglo-American fora. So that is a flaw in the way we do approach international public history. But there is an inevitable attempt because we don't have scholarship on it in India or South Asia broadly. Something for us to think about.
Thank you, Srijan. Tanya?
So unlike Poland, very few people can be persuaded to pass through Australia. It's fiendishly expensive and a very, very long way away. So the best way I get my students to engage with international scholarship, not just through reading, etc., but is through this internship unit that I run, and I'm currently running this semester, where students work with some international colleagues on public history projects. So you have 3 lovely students working with you, Jimena. I also have students working with the National Railway Museum in York. I met Sophie Vora first in Sao Paulo in Brazil at an IFPH conference in 2018. And so she's taken a group of students working. So the internet's been wonderful in facilitating internship projects. And I think that this is something I'd certainly want to explore more and to encourage more in the years ahead. And I also have a really large group of students working on the project that Joanna has just mentioned on the history of German migration to the US and also to Australia. And I'm currently working with colleagues and more of this kind of collaborative level that David's talking about, bringing our students, well, we're hoping to bring our students together at the moment with designing the course materials, bringing together colleagues working in the US, Germany, in Australia on the kind of broader project of the history of German migration around the world. But eventually we want undergraduate and then higher degree research students to be working on this project together in the years ahead. So that's one way in which I've tried to facilitate that work. And I think that's important, not just because it makes students aware of the potential of public history scholarship for themselves. But actually, of course, the vast majority of our students won't go on to higher degree research. They'll graduate, they go on to jobs, not in history, probably. But what I hope that this internship work does is teaches them the value of teamwork and how to articulate the value of history to everyone around them, not just while they're undergraduates, but for their whole lives. And one of the other ways all of us teach is not to our undergraduates or postgraduates at university, but when we give talks to local community and, for me, family history organizations. So, you know, my area of scholarship is family history, which is where, you know, millions of people all over the world are actually learning most about history. It's through their own families or when they undertake research on their family trees. And when I engage with those audiences, which I do in all sorts of forms, and when I give lots of public talks, like I'm sure many of my colleagues do, I see those as teaching moments. But they're also, you know, they're shared moments. I learn a lot from my audiences. I learn a lot about how they're engaging and consuming history when I speak with them. And I tell them a bit about how I produce history and how my colleagues are producing history. And I try and research those encounters as well. And I think that's a really, really important form of history. And also, when I talk with professional historians in Australia as well, I'm constantly bringing their attention to what colleagues are doing all over the world. And again, those are teaching moments. When we work as consultants for historical documentaries, I see those as teaching moments, you know, not just in the final documentary production, but, you know, some of my most exciting teaching moments have been chatting with celebrities, you know, while the camera's down, about, I don't know, the history of swimming in Australia with one of, you know, Australia's Olympic swimming stars, for example. You know, those are really fun teaching moments. So sometimes we need to kind of shake up the ways in which we think we're teaching. You know, when we're having conversations with taxi drivers, with people at the dog park, those are teaching moments as well. And hopefully they're moments where we are sharing the value of all of the work we do around the world. So yeah, that's me on that.
Thank you, Tanya. Well, I think I'm the less experienced here. As I mentioned before, I graduated 2 years ago. So actually at Iona College in New York State is my first like serious job. And I'm not able to teach public history. How I teach those surveys that everybody has to teach at the beginning of their careers that can be quite amazing, but also can be a little bit boring. So this semester I was able to convince my chair to let me teach oral history, and that has been really, really a blast. I have very, very few students because I have noticed that when they entered the class, they didn't had a clue what was that. So I have taught them like a little bit of history, of public history and oral history. I have also invited some colleagues from Latin America, and I have taken the opportunity also because there's a few, I mean, I only have 4 students in that class. So I've taken the opportunity to tell them about the federation and the projects done here, and my colleagues are all over the world, but I also have taken the opportunity to let them know that oral history is also about like memory, subjectivity, communication, a lot of aspects of the field that they were not aware of. So that has been quite amazing. I have also used the internet a lot, like for example, to explore oral archives that are online, and we study immigration. And I try always to bring topics that are like current topics, and then go and tell the story behind them, to try to engage them, to try to talk to them about things that are really happening to them currently. That's for my oral history class, which I really enjoy a lot. But my other classes that are just surveys for everybody, I always, the way I have tried to incorporate like a little element of public history is that as part of their grade, they have to do a presentation, but as part of the presentation, they have to come up with an activity to engage the class. So some students come up with games, with videos, or with certain activities that make them like encourage the class to talk to them and ask questions. That has been really challenging. Sometimes it works really, really well. Sometimes it doesn't, because it's hard for students to think that they are not just the recipient of a lecture. So I try to make them like, no, this is a conversation. And that's where I think my public history training and trend goes in, like, okay, we are all making history here. And some of them think like, no, like you are the professor, you should be telling us stuff. I'm like, no, we are here having this kind of thing. So some of them have come up with really interesting games, but it's hard. So that's the way I have devised, like, these are freshmen, and I hope in the future to have other kinds of classes. Actually, my chair told me I was able to teach other kinds of classes next semester. So that makes me very, very happy. But in my teaching right now, that's the way I have thought that public history could help me, like, also to navigate those surveys that could be challenging for students and for professors. So there's also a comment here from David. I should also have said embracing transnational histories of indigeneity, sexuality, ability, etc., and diasporic communities is also a key element to teaching international public history. Also, to add on that, I rely a lot on in Latin American cases, because I have noticed that at least here in the States, they're not very well known. Some students don't even know where Colombia is, and that's true. So I have to start with a map. Colombia's here. So I tell them like grassroots stories, not only of Colombia, but Latin America. And that has been also like very eye-opening for them. They also tell me, we didn't know that was happening. We didn't know that was, people were doing that. Also, with the explorers, I try to make it all over the world. And also talking to Srijan last time, in July, I'm having a very interesting project about oral public history in India with some of his colleagues that I'm hoping it's going to be a success, because it's the first time we're going to have those kinds of guests in Explorers, well, from that part of the world. And this also leads me to invite everybody who wants to make an event with Explorers, please get in touch with me. We're open to all kinds of public history from all over the world. So yeah, that's what I have to say about this. We have a few minutes left. I don't know if somebody wants to wrap up, make some kind of final comment, or if there's another question.
I was just going to say, I mean, thanks for your commitment to this project. I mean, you do an amazing job of bringing such diverse scholars and practitioners together in conversation. And I think it's fantastic that you're doing this work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanya. I enjoy it a lot, to be honest. Thank you. So, Joanna? Oh, no, I thought you were raising your hand. I'm sorry.
No,
Okay.
I just wanted to join Tanya in thanking you, yes, for bringing us together and for bringing so many interesting topics.
Thank you. Thank you. I will continue doing this. I mean, at the beginning, I think I told you some months ago, I was really hesitant that there was not enough attendance or not enough guests, but now I have a lot, so that encouraged me to keep going, and I'll keep doing it as long as I can. So thank you very much for accepting the invitation, for being here, for talking about the Federation. The video, I will process it and then send it to each one of you as a copy, and I will circulate it on Facebook. And I will take the opportunity to invite the people who are interested. Our next event is precisely with my students of oral history. It's going to take place on May 6th. And the next event is going to be with the interns from Australia. That's also going to be a great event. So we all hope to see you there. And thank you very much for being here. This was lovely. I really appreciate it. Thank you.